It's 3:12 a.m. The apartment is quiet. The city outside is quiet. Even the street below has gone still, that specific stillness that only exists in the hour between late night and early morning when the world forgets itself for a few hours. But your computer fan is screaming. Not the normal hum you've learned to sleep through. A high-pitched, sustained whine, the sound a machine makes when it's being pushed past what it was designed for. You roll your chair forward. Move the mouse. The screen wakes up. You're not running anything. No renders, no compiles, no video. Just a browser with 2 tabs open and a text editor with a half-finished function you abandoned 3 hours ago. You open Task Manager. The list populates. Processes scroll. And there, near the top, consuming 78% of your CPU and climbing, is a process name you don't immediately recognize. You stare at it. Then something in the back of your mind fires. A memory. A late night 3 months ago. A folder you created and never cleaned up. You click into the directory. Your stomach drops. It's a file you wrote yourself. A small experiment. Something you built out of boredom on a Sunday night when you had nothing better to do and too much coffee in your system. You forgot to delete it. But it didn't forget to run. And it's not just running on your machine. You open the connection log. Scroll down. Keep scrolling. Thousands of IP addresses. Dozens of countries. Machines you've never seen, never touched, never knew existed, all connected. All running your code. All waiting. You sit back in your chair. The fan keeps screaming. 3 months earlier, you were just bored. Not the mild, restless boredom of a slow afternoon. The deep, architectural boredom of someone who is genuinely good at something and has nothing meaningful to point it at. You were 23. Computer science degree 3rd year. Good grades, not great. 3 unfinished side projects on your hard drive and a browser history full of Stack Overflow threads you never resolved. It was a Tuesday. Or maybe a Wednesday. The days had started blurring together the way they do when your routine is just, wake up, class, come home, open laptop, close laptop at 2 a.m., sleep, repeat. You'd been reading about distributed computing. Not for class, for yourself, which was always when you actually learned anything. About how clusters of machines could share computational workloads. About how early internet researchers had built systems where thousands of volunteer computers contributed processing power to scientific problems. Folding proteins. Mapping the cosmos. Someone on a forum joked that if you could get enough random strangers' computers to run your code without them knowing, you'd have the world's most powerful free supercomputer. The thread moved on. Everyone laughed and forgot about it. You didn't. Not because you wanted to steal anyone's computing power. Not because you were thinking about money or damage or any of the things you'd later have to think about. Just because the engineering problem was interesting. Could you actually do it? How would the infection vector work? How would you manage the connections? How would you keep the payload lightweight enough not to be noticed? You opened a new file. Started writing. The script was simple at first. It scanned for devices with open, unpatched ports, a common vulnerability on older machines and home routers that most people never think to close. When it found one, it installed a tiny background process. Invisible. Silent. Using less than 2% of CPU so the host machine would never notice anything strange. The installed process did one thing. It connected back to a small server you rented under a fake email address using a prepaid card you bought at a convenience store. Not because you were planning anything. Just because you were already thinking like an engineer, and engineers close their loops. You called the server your command and control node. C2, in the terminology you'd been reading about. You'd learned the vocabulary the way you learn most things, obsessively, from the internet, at 1 a.m. You tested it on your own laptop first. Opened the connection. Watched the little dashboard you'd built register the first node. One machine. Online. Waiting. It worked. You sat back and felt the specific satisfaction of a problem solved. The same feeling you got when a function finally compiled after 6 hours of debugging. Clean. Complete. Then you did what you told yourself was just one more test. You posted the script in a private section of a programming forum you'd been lurking on for 2 years. Buried it inside a longer post about distributed systems. Framed it as a research tool. You went to sleep. In the morning, you checked the dashboard. 12 nodes. Online. Waiting. You smiled. Closed the laptop. Told yourself you'd shut it down after class. You didn't shut it down after class. The numbers climbed the way compound interest climbs, slowly at first, then all at once. 12 became 30. 30 became 90. 90 became 412 over the course of a week, without you changing anything or posting anything new. The script was spreading on its own, hopping from infected machines to other vulnerable devices on the same network. A home router compromised meant every laptop, smart TV, and phone on that Wi-Fi became a potential host. An office machine meant an entire corporate subnet. You watched the dashboard the way other people watched sports scores. Refreshing. Checking. Feeling a small jolt of satisfaction every time the number ticked up. Each node was just a line of text. An IP address, a timestamp, an operating system version. Windows XP on some ancient desktop somewhere in Romania. A MacBook in a university library in South Korea. A Linux server running an outdated SSH configuration in a data center in Germany that someone had clearly forgotten existed. You told yourself they were just numbers. That no one was being hurt. That you weren't taking anything from these machines, just borrowing a sliver of their existence. But you knew, even then, that the people those machines belonged to hadn't agreed to any of it. That their computers were running your code right now, at this moment, while they slept or worked or watched TV in the next room. That you had reached through the internet and installed something in their homes without asking. You pushed the thought away and checked the dashboard again. 473 nodes. Online. Waiting. You upgraded the infrastructure. The original rental server wasn't built for this kind of load. You moved to a dedicated server in a jurisdiction with loose data laws. Added a proper web panel, something you built yourself over 2 weekends, with charts, graphs, real-time infection maps, a global visualization that showed active nodes as small green dots scattered across a dark world map. You spent more time on the dashboard than on any of your actual coursework. You added features. Categorization by operating system. Filtering by geography. Uptime tracking per node. You built an alert system that pinged you when node count dropped significantly, which might indicate your script had been flagged by an antivirus update. You responded to those alerts immediately. Sometimes at 3 a.m. Sometimes in the middle of a lecture. You'd excuse yourself to the bathroom and spend 12 minutes in a stall rewriting the obfuscation layer on your payload so it could slip past whatever new signature had been added to the antivirus databases. You were good at it. Better than you'd expected. The network passed 10,000 nodes on a Thursday evening. You remember because you sat and stared at the number for almost 5 minutes. 10,000 machines. 10,000 CPUs idling in the background of 10,000 lives, connected in a web that only you could see. You thought about the processing power represented by those machines. The combined RAM. The aggregate bandwidth. You ran the calculations. It was more raw computing power than many mid-sized companies operated. And it cost you $40 a month in server fees. Wake up. Check the dashboard. Eat. Check the dashboard. Sit in class and think about the dashboard. Come home. Check the dashboard. Sleep at 4 a.m. Wake up. Check the dashboard. You weren't stealing anything. You kept telling yourself that. You weren't reading anyone's files or logging their keystrokes or accessing their cameras. You were just running a background process. Using a fraction of something they weren't using anyway. But the machines belonged to people. And the people didn't know. You knew that. You just stopped letting yourself think about it. It started as a thought experiment. You were reading about distributed denial of service attacks. DDoS. You understood the mechanics. Flood a server with more requests than it can handle until it collapses under the weight. Simple in concept. Devastating in practice. And you had, sitting in a dashboard tab you kept open in the background at all times, somewhere between 40 and 60,000 machines. You told yourself you were just curious. That you'd pick a target that didn't matter. A test environment. Something you controlled. You picked a small website, a defunct blog that hadn't been updated in 3 years, hosted on a cheap shared server, almost certainly with no active users. Something that wouldn't hurt anyone even if it went down. You wrote a simple instruction. Sent it to the network. Watch the outbound traffic meter on your dashboard spike. The website went offline in 22 seconds. You sat very still for a moment. Then you brought it back. You hadn't actually taken it down permanently, just overwhelmed it temporarily, and watched the traffic normalize on your dashboard. 22 seconds. 60,000 machines. One command from your bedroom. The adrenaline was unlike anything you'd felt before. Not the clean satisfaction of solving a coding problem. Something rawer. Something that felt less like achievement and more like power. You closed the laptop. Told yourself that was the last time. Opened it again 40 minutes later. This time you pointed the network at a larger target. A gaming server that had been the subject of complaints on forums you frequented, notorious for hosting cheaters, widely disliked, no sympathy lost if it went down for a few hours. It lasted 11 seconds. You watched the traffic graphs peak and drop. Watched the target go dark on a connectivity monitor you'd pulled up in a second window. 11 seconds. You sat in your dark room with the fan humming and the green dots glowing on your world map, and felt something shift quietly inside you. Some threshold crossed. Some previous version of yourself left behind in the moment before you hit send on that first command. You told yourself it was just a game server. That nobody got hurt. That it was back online in 20 minutes anyway. But you'd used the network to cause harm. Small harm, maybe. Harm you could rationalize away. But harm that someone else experienced. Latency, disconnection, frustration, loss. Because you had decided to demonstrate to yourself what you were capable of. You checked the dashboard. 63,000 nodes. Online. Waiting. You didn't advertise what you were doing. You told no one. You had no online persona associated with the project, no forum posts claiming credit, nothing that connected your identity to the network. But code leaves fingerprints. The way your payload was structured. The specific obfuscation techniques you used. The timing patterns of your C2 communications. The geographic distribution of your node concentration. These things were, to someone who knew what to look for, as distinctive as a signature. 3 weeks after the gaming server incident, a message appeared in your inbox on an encrypted forum you used for programming discussions. No greeting. No introduction. Asterisk. You the one running the new botnet out of Eastern Europe routing? We've been watching the traffic patterns. Interested in talking. Asterisk. You didn't respond. 4 days later, a second message. This one included 3 screenshots. Your command panel. The exact layout. The specific color scheme you'd chosen at 2 a.m. one night because you liked the way dark green looked on black. IP addresses from your C2 server that no one should have known. They had been inside your infrastructure. Or close enough to it to see things they shouldn't have been able to see. The third message contained a number. Just a number. Followed by 2 words per month. It was more money than your parents made in 6 months combined. All you had to do was rent out the network. Short-term access for clients who needed traffic volume. DDoS for hire. Crypto mining campaigns where your nodes did the computational work and the client took the output. Spam distribution. Credential stuffing. Running stolen username and password combinations against banking and retail sites to find accounts that reused passwords. You told yourself no. Then you told yourself you'd think about it. Then you told yourself you'd just respond. Just talk. Talking wasn't agreeing to anything. You sent one message back, asterisk. What are the terms? Asterisk. The money arrived in Monero, untraceable, clean, already in a wallet you'd set up specifically for this. The first month felt unreal. You kept checking the balance the way you used to check the dashboard. Refreshing. Verifying. Making sure it was still there. It was still there. You invested it back into the infrastructure. Better servers. More redundancy. A second C2 network running in parallel as a fallback in case the primary got taken down. Encrypted communication channels with your clients. A tiered access system where different clients got different levels of network access depending on what they were paying. The botnet crossed 100,000 nodes. Then 200,000. You added automatic spreading mechanisms. Your script now updated itself, adapted to new vulnerability disclosures within hours of them being published, patched its own obfuscation in response to antivirus updates. You had built something that was, in a meaningful sense, self-sustaining. You watched the global map. North America dense with nodes. Europe thick. Southeast Asia growing. Everywhere people had old machines, unpatched software, home routers still running factory default credentials. Which was everywhere, your network found purchase. You stopped thinking of them as people's computers. That was the transition you didn't notice happening until it was complete. At some point between the first 12 nodes and the 200,000, the green dots on your map stopped representing people, a grandmother's laptop in Ohio, a teenager's gaming PC in the Philippines, a small business server in Portugal, and became just nodes. Infrastructure. Units of computational resource in a network you operated. The clients kept coming. You never met any of them. All encrypted messages, all anonymous payment, all deniable. You didn't ask what the DDoS targets were. You didn't ask who owned the crypto wallets your mining campaigns filled. You didn't ask what was in the spam campaigns your network distributed. You told yourself that was better. That not knowing was a form of innocence. But you knew. Monthly revenue crossed what a senior software engineer made in a year. Then crossed it again. You were 23 years old, living in the same apartment, eating the same cheap takeout, wearing the same hoodies, staring at the same screens. But the numbers in your Monero wallet kept climbing with a consistency that felt almost mechanical. Because it was mechanical. You had built a machine. And the machine ran. The first sign was subtle. A traffic spike on a Tuesday afternoon. Not dramatic, maybe 15% above baseline. You checked the active jobs. Nothing scheduled. No client had purchased access for that window. You dug into the logs. Someone had modified the payload. Not your payload as originally written. A version of it that had propagated through 3 generations of infection, passing from machine to machine, being slightly altered each time a client with access touched it. Like a document passed through too many hands, each one making small edits, until the version you were looking at barely resembled what you'd written. And in that modified version, there were instructions you hadn't put there. You traced them back. Spent 4 days in the logs, following the chain. The modifications had originated from a client account, one of your mid-tier renters, someone you'd given partial access to for a DDoS campaign 3 months ago. They hadn't just used the network. They'd modified the infection mechanism and pushed their own code into the propagation layer. Your botnet was now distributing someone else's payload to new infections. You didn't know what that payload did. You pulled it apart in a sandboxed environment. It was a keylogger. A sophisticated one, designed to harvest banking credentials from browsers and quietly exfiltrate them to a server you didn't control and couldn't trace. Your network was stealing people's banking passwords. Not because you had decided to do that. Because someone you'd rented access to had decided to do that, and the infrastructure you'd built was obedient enough to comply. You sent a termination message to the client account. Got no response. The modifications kept propagating. You locked the account. The modifications were already embedded too deeply in the network to stop spreading through that channel alone. You sat in front of your screens for a long time. You had built a machine so large, so complex, so self-propagating that you no longer fully controlled it. It had outgrown you. It had taken on passengers you didn't invite. It was doing things in your name, with your infrastructure, that you hadn't sanctioned and couldn't cleanly stop. The green dots on the map kept glowing. Waiting. doing whatever they'd been told to do by whoever had gotten to them last. You thought about the grandmother's laptop in Ohio, the teenager's gaming PC, the small business server. You thought about their bank accounts. You spent 3 sleepless nights writing the kill switch. It had to be clean. A final update that would push to every node simultaneously, or as close to simultaneously as the network's propagation speed allowed, and execute a full uninstall. Wipe the payload. Close the backdoor. Remove every trace of your code from every infected machine, and then remove itself. Then wipe the command servers. Overwrite the logs. Close the wallet. Walk away. You tested it in a controlled environment 17 times before you trusted it. Each time it worked. Clean removal. No residue. On the morning of the 4th day, you opened the dashboard one last time. 312,000 nodes. Green dots across the world map, dense overpopulated areas, scattered across developing regions where old hardware lived longest. 312,000 machines. 312,000 people who had no idea. You thought about all of them for a moment. Let yourself think about them as people again, for the first time in months. The grandmother. The teenager. The forgotten server in the data center. Then you hit deploy. The update propagated outward through the network. You watched the node counter in the top corner of the dashboard. 312,000. 311. 310. The drop accelerating as the kill switch reached more nodes and those nodes stopped relaying. 200,000. 100,000. 50. 12. 5. 0. The screen went blank. The map went dark. The fan quieted to its normal register, that low background hum you'd stopped noticing months ago and only now recognized as the sound of a machine at rest. You sat in silence for a long time. Weeks passed. Your life returned to what it had been before, or something that looked like it from the outside. Class. Laptop. Takeout at midnight. Sleep at 3 a.m. No alerts. No client messages. No propagation reports. No traffic spikes at 3 a.m. from a payload you didn't write running on machines you couldn't see. No dashboard. The money was still in the wallet. You hadn't spent most of it, hadn't known how to spend it safely, and now it sat there, a number that represented something you were trying to decide how to feel about. You thought about donating it. Thought about destroying the wallet entirely. Did neither. Just let it sit. You started sleeping more. Eating at normal hours. Finishing the assignments that had been accumulating since you'd started spending every spare hour on the network. People around you noticed you seemed calmer. Less distracted. You smiled and said you just cut back on caffeine. But some nights, not every night, but some nights, you'd open your laptop at 3 a.m. out of a habit so deep it had become something closer to instinct, and navigate to a browser tab that no longer existed, toward a dashboard that was gone, toward a map that had gone dark months ago. And you'd sit in the glow of a blank screen and feel the absence of it like a physical thing. Not guilt. You had something that might become guilt, eventually, if you gave it enough time and honesty. But not yet. Something else. Something quieter and harder to name. You told yourself you'd shut it down because it had gotten out of control. Because someone else's code was running through your network. Because the risk had finally outweighed the reward. All of that was true. But there was another truth underneath it, one you kept pushing to the back of the room every time it moved toward the front. You had shut it down because you were afraid of how much you enjoyed it. Not the money. Not the technical achievement. The control. The sensation of sitting alone in a dark apartment at 3 a.m. and knowing that on the other side of your screen, 300,000 machines were waiting for your instruction. That you could reach into homes and offices and data centers across the world and make something happen. That you were, in the most literal sense, pulling strings no one else could see. That feeling had been the most real thing in your life for months. And now it was gone. And the silence it left behind was louder than any server fan ever was. You closed the empty browser tab. Open a new file. Start writing.